something that I think we're getting pretty good at this point is actually shipping games. We've released 4 games at this point, and whilst the first ones definitely took a lot of time and required a lot of canceling of projects, we're starting to go into a flow now where we are getting better and better at saying, okay, this is the game we're going to be making, we're going to release it around this time, and actually hitting those goals. And that is something that I get a lot of comments from you guys from often of like, wow, I wish I could release my games in less than 5 years or whatever. And I want to talk a bit about why I think it is that some people struggle with releasing games. Because I think at the end of the day, we have to be realistic. There's only so much time in your life before you're going to drop dead. I know this is a morbid intro, I guess, but if you take 5 years to develop a game, or you take like 2 years and you don't waste as much time getting to that released state, that just means you can make more games and probably also get better at making more games. And hopefully maybe at some point even build up that dream of becoming a full-time game developer. Now, of course, you need to get to that point to be able to actually release games. And I think one of the biggest problems when I talk to like our audience and like their games and like, oh, what do you need help with, is they don't really understand what done looks like for their game when they actually press that release button. I think there was this quote I once heard of like, yeah, a game is never finished, it's just like kicked out the door or it's just abandoned, whatever. Basically, any game idea you can have, you can spend 10 years on it. Genuinely, like even a game like Unicycle Pizza Time, which we made in a month, we could also have been like, yeah, we're going to make this in like a full year and we're going to add like 10 different levels and a story mode and all of that. You can keep adding features and functionality to your game and keep expanding on it. That's how you get that trope of the 7-year game development as well, where you just do everything. And I think this is a very big problem because you're going to be spending a long time on your game and you're going to kind of fall in love with it to a certain degree, where you want it to be as good as possible for the most part. You don't want to ship out something that is half-baked, but the problem then is if you don't have a clear original scope definition of this is the game I'm going to make and these are the features I'm going to have when I launch, it gets really hard because then you start adding all of these kind of half-assed features of like, yeah, I want a cooking system and I want a quest system and I want this and I want this. And you get basic implementations, but then that actual like bring them up to full production ready level takes so much more time because you at the beginning of development didn't say, this is the game I'm going to be making and this is when I'm going to release it. And there are some ways to do this. You know, you have game design documents, which are a good guiding point. Something that we personally like to do as well is make anti-feature lists. So right at the beginning, we already say, no matter what, we're not going to add this feature to our game or this feature to this game. Like we're going to never add character customization. And those are things that maybe later on in your development cycle, you are going to get someone who asks like, hey, are we going to get character customization? And if it's just like a few people, I would say, no, we're not doing that because we made it so that it is. Now, these are not set in stone rules. If 100% of your player feedback is, yeah, this game could have been better with character customization, update it. Scopes can change, I understand that. But by immediately starting with a baseline idea already of what is the game that I'm going to be making, you're going to be much better suited in the long run to not just infinitely scope creep your way because you keep thinking like, oh, I could add this and this and this. Having the documentation to kind of hold you accountable, like, look, me half a year ago explicitly said we're not adding multiplayer. So I'm not going to be adding multiplayer now that my code base is already written off, that it's just not worth it. And this kind of goes a bit further even of, okay, you have your initial scope, that is one thing. And then also it's like you're kind of moving the goalposts of like the quality level you want. This is another one where it's like, oh, I'll do a visual overhaul. Oh, I'll refactor this mechanic. So maybe you're not even adding new mechanics, but you could still be like, hey, I could add this entire system, or like, I want to change all of my assets out in a different art style and all of that. And this is once again, something it's easy to fall into. And I understand where you come from of like, hey, I want to make as good of a game as possible. It's just finding that balance of, okay, making a good game and making a game that is ever going to be able to be shipped. And yeah, you can go for your perfect dream game and it takes 15 years, but then you're going to be refactoring so much by the end of the time because like the way programming works has changed in that course of time that it's just not feasible anymore. Now, okay, you've got your scope defined, you planned, okay, I'm going to be spending about 9 months on this. These are the things that I'm going to have in my game. These are things I'm not going to have in my game. You seem like you're doing well. I think one problem then is you lie to yourself about how much work you can do, or at least you don't have a clear understanding of what you can do. I remember this, I think a year ago, more than a year ago at this point, I once talked to a viewer and he was like, yeah, I'm going to get into game development. I'd like to hear your thoughts. And he was like, yeah, I don't know programming yet, but I'm learning it now. I'm going to pull in like 80 to 100 hours a week. I know I can work that hard on it. And like, this is of course an extreme number. Nobody can work that long for that much time, basically. And I think this is a very big pitfall where you're like, okay, I'm all excited about this project. I'm going to scope it at 9 months and I'm planning to work, let's say 20 hours a week on it because you're doing it part-time on the side. But this is, you can do 20 hours a week on it when you're super energetic, super excited, life hasn't gotten in the way and all of that. And just like a few weeks later or a month later, you'll often notice that the amount of actual hours worked suddenly goes down to like 10 or whatever, because shit happens, life happens. These are things that you just can't ignore. And by just not being realistic and honest with yourself in the beginning of development, you're immediately going to disappoint yourself when you're inevitably not going to be hitting that initial deadline you were planning on. I would love to say that, hey, I work 80 hours a week, Sigma grind set, but I know that's not true. There are limitations, even though theoretically, yeah, I could work 168 hours a week with enough methamphetamine. I know that it's not going to be sustainable in the long run, and then I'm going to just crash and burn at some point when I realize that, hey, my scope actually is 3 times as long because I can't put in as much time as I had hoped for. And this is when an idea gets more demoralizing, because maybe you had a game idea and it was like, yeah, this sounds exciting, I can work on this for a while, but you can't work infinitely long on game ideas. Sometimes you just want to get over with it. That's that quote once again of games never get finished, they get abandoned, because you want to move on to that next shiny object and you don't want to commit 4 years to that same project because you have less time than you initially thought. And this is also why we do that small scoped game approach, because at the end of the day, yeah, you can say like, oh, this is going to be my scope for what I'm going to deliver and all of that, and I'm not going to add more features during development. That's one thing. But just having a scope that is not giant to begin with does so much already. And I know a lot of you guys are like, hey, I don't know really, should I make small games? I think we made a really good video over there with Dude, the developer of Minami Lane, where we dive a bit deeper into, okay, what is a small game exactly? What should you make and all of that? Because you're going to bite off most likely more than you can chew with getting your game idea out there. Even we do that. Games like Overtime and Only, for example, we initially scoped that for 2 months. It ended up being 4 months, but it was still all right because it's kind of that aim small, miss small approach. We aimed for a small timeline, so even though we went massively over time, so to say percentage-wise, it was just like 1.5 months, like 6 weeks or something, which makes it very bearable suddenly, because you can push through for 1.5 months. But if you realize that, okay, this scope is bigger than I had initially planned for, and I'm going to need another year of development, and you're coming to that realization 2 years into development already, there's a very big chance you're just gonna say, fuck it, we give it up, and we start a new project. You start once again with that cycle of you promise yourself you're going to be making a smaller scoped game, only to realize then a year down the line that, hey, actually, it's not that small. So really, small scoped games, focus on one core gameplay loop. I think even Overtime alone, I wouldn't say it's like a small scoped game anymore, but things like Unicycle Pizza Time, what was the gameplay loop? The navigation with the unicycle. There's a lot of ideas that you can have where you focus on that one gameplay loop and you can make a solid 2 to 3 hour experience surrounding it already. So don't feel like you just need to add features and features and features, because coming up with features is very easy, but actually implementing it, playtesting them, making sure that they just are fun to begin with, that's a whole different story. And then this last one, it's something that most of you aren't gonna be dealing with. But if you actually have gotten to the point where you feel like, hey, my game, it's almost kind of done, but you still feel like you don't want to release it, it's just the fact that you're scared. Whether it's scared to move on, this sounds like breakup advice, or whether it's scared to get feedback from real people, because deep down in your heart of hearts, you know that the game isn't going to be good enough. And this is where you get that perfectionism as well. I know a lot of game developers are, I would say, neurodivergent. They're like, yeah, it needs to be absolutely perfect, no problems at all, super flawless, whatever. It needs to be perfect in their eyes, and otherwise they're not gonna ship it. And I understand that approach, because that's what things like Stardew Valley got super popular for. I know someone is already commenting, but Stardew Valley did everything perfect and look where they are now. Yeah, there's also so many games that just never got to that Stardew Valley point, even though they were very much perfect as well. There's a lot more things that come into account than just making the good game. And this leads basically to you just eternally procrastinating on your game. Even though the game is like kind of done, you're like, oh, I can tweak this. Oh, I can do a visual overhaul. Oh, I can rework the UI. You can keep yourself busy, but at a certain point, you need to realize that, hey, we need to kick this baby out of the door. the stuff you're working on is just diminishing results basically, and it's really not going to be that impactful. Or maybe it's something else where you're like, hey, I don't feel confident about core gameplay loop, but I'm already 2 years in. Just polishing up the UI isn't going to fix it. And at some point, especially with those first games, you need to accept that, hey, they're not going to be perfect. I'm just going to get them out there. I'm going to get feedback. I'm going to learn so much from it. And that once you've released the game, there's so much you learn about yourself, about the process of releasing games and all of that, that I can guarantee you the next games you're going to make are going to have less of those same mistakes that you made before of, for example, having a bad idea of how many hours can I effectively work a week, how much of a scope can I actually handle, how long is my attention span. I think that's a big one, for example, that we realized with Thomas. The guy has the attention span of a toddler. We can't do more than 6-month-long projects because he's gonna get bored by month 3 already. Those are things that you can only learn over time by going through that full process. So really, I urge you, look at when can I release this game? Are there some things that I can do based on some of the advice that I gave in this video? Because shipping games at the end of the day, that is so important. And shipping good games is even more important. But I think to a certain degree, there's no point in eternally trying to chase that dream of the perfect game. Not every game is going to be an 89% overwhelmingly positive. I think if you can reach that 75, 80%, I would already be happy with it. I think we're doing pretty okay at like our first game is at like 68%. There were a lot of issues with that one, I have to be honest. But then the games we released afterwards have all been pretty positively received. I think 85% and at 89% currently. I think that we are getting better at game development. I think it's just wrong to assume that the first game you're gonna make is immediately going to be overwhelmingly positive. So thank you very much for watching. If you'd like to learn more about game development and the things that we learn along the way, head down below and subscribe, and we'll get notified at the moment that we upload these videos. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!